This is a review of Orville, Burden of Command, I think. Oh gosh, I don't even remember the title. This is a review of the second episode of Orville. I haven't seen the first episode yet, so I'm coming into this series having only watched the second episode first. But I'm not one of those people who cares about spoilers, which, by the way, you should take as a warning if you watch any of my reviews of any show, because I have spoilers. I don't care. I really don't care about spoilers, either as a viewer or as a reviewer. So just assume anything I review will have spoilers, because I like to discuss the entire story arc from beginning to end. Since I'm interested in watching other media, of course I'd like to watch it for entertainment, but I wouldn't be reviewing it if it were only for my own entertainment. I would just entertain myself, and that would be that. I watch these stories because I want to learn how to write, and I want to learn what makes a good story. And that's why I review it, because hopefully I wouldn't say that I'm passing it on to you, but by discussing it out loud with you, a friend out there in the world, I feel like I learned something from that process. So the Orville. And this is all new to me too, this kind of review, so I apologize if it's a little disjointed at first. So I'm not a huge Family Guy fan, and I wasn't sure what to expect going into this. In fact, I heard the comparisons to Galaxy Quest. I really enjoyed Galaxy Quest. I thought it was really funny, and I thought this would probably be funny. Sci-fi humor is not my favorite genre, but I like it. I prefer my sci-fi a little bit more straight-laced, a little bit more serious, more drama, less comedy. But I don't like it to be so dark and miserable and depressing. I also watched one episode of STD, the new Star Trek. I did not like that at all. I've seen other reviewers talk about how if it had been some other science fiction franchise and didn't try to call itself Star Trek, it would be all right. And that might be true. I'm not sure. Anyway, I should discuss that in a separate review. For the Orville, the problem wasn't that it was too serious, but that it was a little too farcical for me, which I kind of figured going in, knowing who the writer was and all of that. There were a lot of jokes that were I wouldn't say that they were crude, but they seemed very contemporary. There are a lot of references to smoking joints and pop culture. And it was funny. Some of them were very funny. But it kind of broke the fourth wall for me, because any reference to pop culture from today doesn't make me feel like I'm in the future. How many of us would get pop culture references from the 19th century? In fact, this is actually a kind of fun challenge for yourself. Read 19th century literature, and if you've read Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen and things like that, good for you. But try to read even more, less famous pieces. If you get a hold of an old magazine, Ladies' Home Journal, for instance, goes back pretty far. If you get some of the late 19th century editions of that, you could probably find this on Gutenberg Press. Read some of those. Sometimes they will throw in what is essentially pop culture references into their stories. And you will have no idea what they're talking about, because the contemporary politics, the contemporary famous people, the contemporary clothes even, are so obscure to us already, even just one century away, that we don't have any idea what they're talking about. So my sense of time is such that I don't think I would really understand what the pop culture references would be from a century from now. And then if they're referring to things that I recognize, that is probably not correct. On the other hand, science fiction writers sometimes go in the other extreme. They make a mistake where they will have, for instance, Kermit the Frog was in this, and that was cute. And it's a humanoid-looking frog, so one of the aliens asks the captain, who is it? Is that somebody you know? Thinking it's a sentient human. And he makes a somewhat humorous remark about, oh, it's a leader I admire. He inspired his people. And it's funny because it's Kermit the Frog. But it's kind of also true, right? And I can imagine that actually Kermit the Frog or somebody from a big enough franchise, they also make a reference to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Perhaps we would still be aware of those kinds of pop culture things because we don't know how long those kinds of franchises will last into the future. We still know who David and Goliath are. We still know who Elizabeth Bennet is. So some pop culture may indeed still survive into the future. I don't know what century the Orville is supposed to be set in. So it can work. It's a fine line. It's a fine line. Anyway, it's not a huge nitpick. I thought it's an interesting thing that you should always consider when you're writing sci-fi. What I did like is that the aliens certainly didn't know the pop culture reference. So I liked the main storyline. A quick summary of it is that the captain and his ex-wife are called away to what they think is a ship in distress, and they're captured by very advanced aliens who put them into a zoo. Meanwhile, the youngest officer is left in charge of the ship, and she's very uncertain of herself. She basically goes around asking other officers to take away her command. She literally goes to the doctor and says, can't you come up with some reason that I am unfit for command? And they all tell her, no, you can do this. Do it. I feel like she's a kind of stand-in for a millennial. But I guess it's a universal story. I think this is a kind of story that would take place in any age, where a young person would be uncertain and it's their first command and they don't know what to do, and then she has to decide between rescuing her captain against direct orders. Now here's the part where I felt, again, the lighthearted nature of it came into play. Basically, her fellow officers, or the people who are, I'm not sure what they are, maybe they're not. I'm not exactly clear about the chain of command. The dudes in orange, it's very next-gen Star Trek-like, where there's color codes for the different chains of command. Except on this one, there's 4 colors, and as far as I can tell, the people wearing orange, their role on the ship is comic relief. So they tell her, oh, you suck, because you're following orders and you're going home. Oh, man, it doesn't feel very realistic to me that it's just expected that you would disobey orders and go into a very, very dangerous zone to rescue somebody, even if it's your captain and the first officer. That's where it goes more into the comedic zone, but also the heroic story. So again, I'm willing to go with that. I kind of felt like I would have preferred she make the decision more because she really felt it was the right thing to do than it almost felt like she made the decision out of peer pressure because people didn't like her because she didn't command them to go rescue the captain. Girl, who cares if people like you? Do what's right. If following orders is the right thing, even if it's unpopular, you do that. On the other hand, if you really have a good plan and you think you can rescue them, then do that, even if that's unpopular. So, but it felt in keeping with her character, and it didn't feel... It was a very believable story. She felt like a very relatable character, and I like her a lot as a character. I like all the characters, actually. I'm not too thrilled about the ex-wife setup. I don't mind having characters who have interpersonal problems, though. That part I do like. I can't quite imagine somebody being set up with their ex-wife on a ship. That seems like a huge conflict of interest. There would have to be some rules against conflict of interest. You're not supposed to fraternize with fellow officers for this very reason. So I don't understand how they could serve together. I know they're no longer... I don't know. I don't know how it works in the current military, if that would be allowed or not. To me, it felt very odd. And I also really don't like couples quarreling as a on-screen time. I don't like divorce-type themes. So that's just a personal pet peeve. I'm not thrilled about that setup. But I guess it does take care of the question of the sexual tension between the captain and the first officer. Every time you have a male and a female character working together, you're going to end up with this situation where the question is, will they or won't they? They're going to be sexual tension. And here, because they've sort of already been there, done that, it didn't work. The advantage of it as a setup is that you can have the ongoing sexual tension, and yet they already know this is not going to work for them. So that leaves them both free for other entanglements. So as a series, it has its pros and cons. As a series setup for ongoing characters, it has its pros and cons. The series seems to be doing more of an episodic nature. Again, it's hard to tell, this is only the second episode. More like the old Star Trek, where they're self-contained episodes. This is very different than the real Star Trek. STD is taking a very long story arc. I don't have a preference for episodic versus long story arcs. Or, if anything, I tend to actually prefer longer story arcs. I like this thing of modern TV, where television has become even more in-depth than cinema. It used to be much more shallow than cinema. And I think basically the reason was because of how long you had on screen. It's just a matter of screen time. You could do more with characters in 2 hours than you could do in 47 minutes. Now it's been reversed. You have much more shallow characters in the movies, especially nowadays, where all movies are just these action blockbusters with huge ensemble casts, and you never really get very much character development. And TV has become where you really go for the ongoing in-depth look into people's lives and relationships and very complicated storylines, and stories like Game of Thrones, which are the equivalent of multi-volume series. I love that. I love those long, convoluted story arcs. In Orville, we're going more toward the episodic, and that works with the lighter comedic tone and the more self-contained stories. Again, I could come into this second episode without having seen the first episode. No problems. In that sense, it's good. I didn't really need the setup in the first episode. I was good to go. But I do see some elements of longer-term story arcs, and I like that too. It ended on a cliffhanger with there's a Klingon-like character, and I forgot the name of the species, what they call them. And they're all male. That's a really cool setup. I love science fiction because you can do things like that. You can have these cool different societies that are very similar and yet not human. So they have the setup with the all male species, and then he has this egg, and that scene was hilarious, and I loved it. Visually very funny, and yet very serious too. He plays it really straight. The actor plays it straight. It's very cool. And, hold on guys, opening the door. So that part was cool. I really like that subplot where I'm on maternity leave, except it's egg leave, I guess you'd call it. I'm not available for anything because I'm on egg duty. That was great. And that was another reason that the youngest officer was in charge of the ship. So that was cool. Now, the theme of being put in a zoo, that's been done before. In fact, that was famously the pilot episode of the very first Trek series, way back in the 60s. And here, I don't understand why people are so hard on zoos. I thought they didn't quite make the correct analogy in this episode. They have a species, and they put other species, clearly intelligent, sentient bipeds, into a zoo situation, and it's compared to animals. Well, no, I'm sorry. At some point in the episode, one of the people has a conversation with one of the zookeepers. That is not comparable to putting animals in a zoo. That's comparable to the Victorian, it wasn't actually Victorians because it wasn't in Britain, I think it was in Germany, where they did an exhibit of peoples of the world, and they had primitive people from Africa and India and Polynesia in front of their huts, and it was almost like a zoo. Although even that, they weren't slaves, they weren't captured against their will, they were paid to be there, so they were more like performers. But if they had been captured against their will and put into a zoo against their will, other sentient beings who happen to have a lower technology level than you do into a zoo. That is not the same as animals. I think that blurring the line between sentient beings and non-sentient beings is extremely insulting to people who have been treated like animals in human history when they're not animals. People whose rights have been taken away and they have been treated like oxen. If you then say, well, then we should free the oxen too, because that's exactly like slavery in the Old South. I find that offensive. I don't like that implication at all. I don't think that's valid. But again, that's just my pet peeve with it. Overall, I liked the episode, and the ending was very funny, and yet at the same time it was another instance of this pop culture reference. So apparently again, spoilers. If you didn't get the spoilers already, here comes spoilers for the end. I want to discuss the ending. The spoilers are that they make a trade, or instead of having these humans as their exhibit, the alien gives them the history of human television. And particularly, see, this is where my lack of pop reference knowledge handicapped me in understanding the joke immediately. I kind of got it, but I think I would have gotten it more if I actually watched reality TV, because it wasn't just the history of human television. They didn't show episodes from I Love Lucy. They showed The Bachelor. I don't even know this show. I'm so out of it in pop culture. I don't watch reality TV. I have no idea what they showed. That's the truth. But I got the idea. They're like, oh, we'll show you people behaving like animals. So again, they kind of made this comparison here for humor. Some people do behave like they belong in a zoo. Ha ha ha. So we'll put them in a zoo, but not really put them in a zoo, because even the Kardashians or whoever they were insulting, I don't know, doesn't actually deserve to be locked up. Anyway, so I thought that was a really interesting ending. It brought up all sorts of actually interesting ideas. Like maybe the reason that this species has to put other sentient beings in a zoo is because they don't have any novelists or television producers. They don't have any fiction. It reminds me of this indie film, The Invention of Lying, which, by the way, is a great film. I should review that too. It's a great film. The premise of this is, what if humans had never developed lying? And then they push that all the way to the interesting conclusion that you would not only not have any kind of fiction, you wouldn't have any kind of religion. So it's a very interesting proposition, and some people might find it controversial. But it's a great film. Whether you agree with their premise or not, you should watch it and check it out. It's also very, very funny because, like, for instance, you get to see what would a first date be like if you didn't lie, even to be polite. For instance, I think the woman on the date gets a call in the middle of the dinner, and she says, oh, that's my mother. She's calling so I can get out of the date early if I don't like how it's going. I think I'll probably accept it. Anyway, and it just goes on and on like that. And then the main character invents lying, and then he gets this huge advantage. But one of the things they show in that movie that made me think of these aliens in Orville is they don't have fiction, so they do have television. So every television show is somebody sitting in a chair telling you facts about things like the 14th century. So basically everything is like a super boring historical documentary show without even illustrating it fictionally, because they don't know how to do that. They haven't thought to do that. So apparently these aliens are that society. They don't know how to lie. So for entertainment, they're forced to get other intelligent beings, not animals, to entertain them, basically. So that was the episode. So I'm going to give it a try again and keep watching it, see where it goes. If it stays really, really farcical, or if it gets a little more serious, I would actually like that. My favorite combination is a high drama but lighthearted moments to leaven the drama. All right. And this is a very long and rambling video, and I'm not going to edit it all. So I apologize for all the pauses and ums and sounds and cars in the background and the sound quality. I don't have time to edit all the videos if I want to keep putting up a lot of videos. I'm just going to, when I watch a show, I'll review it right afterwards, and then I'll pop it up. And if you want my opinion on it, you can give a listen, and that's how I'm going to do it. Okay, Tara out.